Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today to the iCast Online. We are really excited today to kick off another one of our conservation seminars, and this one today will be focusing on aquatic invasive species. My name is Chad Tokowitz, and I'm the Inland Fisheries Policy Manager for the American Sport Fishing Association. And today we are joined by three excellent guests who are all prominent experts in the aquatic invasive species space. We will be hearing from Frank Fish, the Chief of Fisheries for the Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency, Craig Martin, Chief, Branch of Aquatic Invasive Species at the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, and Pat Kazemius, the President and CEO of Wildlife Forever. I brought these three speakers together because they all highlight an important aspect in regards to aquatic invasive species management, control, outreach, and education. And we're really excited to hear their perspectives on this issue today. But before we go any further and enjoy some of their awesome presentations, I just want to quickly contextualize why this is of importance to the American Sport Fishing Association. ASA is guided by key objectives: clean waters, abundant fisheries, access, an increase in participation, and we always want to support business needs. Aquatic invasive species have the ability to effectively impact all 5 of these objectives. And for that reason, it is something that the American Sport Fishing Association and many of our partners have been focused on engaging with in recent times. Very briefly, I want to highlight some of our involvement. We're extremely involved in advocacy at both the state and federal level. We advocate for legislation and appropriations, and also participate in Hill briefings where we educate congressional staff on the importance of aquatic invasive species issues, while also touting the importance of certain pieces of legislation or appropriations efforts. Additionally, we work with NGOs to support their missions and goals, understanding that it is important to not only work with the government and focus on advocating for policy, but also work for others who are operating outside of that space. Like I said earlier, we have some excellent presentations lined up to further contextualize and dive deeper into this issue. And to start, we're going to hear from Frank Fish and learn more about what's going on in Tennessee.
For having me for this presentation. I'm Frank Fish, Chief of Fisheries, and I'm here to represent the state level perspective of invasive species. I started out, like most of my colleagues, wanting to work on trout, bass, crappie, all those things that get us interested in fishing in the first place. And I find that every year my career is mired more and more in invasive species issues. So I guess I'm a good person to at least give Tennessee's perspective, but I think a lot of my colleagues in other states have shared this experience. Just so you in ICAS understand how our agency works. We have all of our fisheries funding is coming from license sales of fishing licenses, and most of the money we get is from the Sport Fish Restoration Act, and those are the funds that you're providing with your excise tax payments. And my budget of about $11 million for Tennessee fisheries, 70% of that comes from the manufacturers' excise taxes. So we couldn't do the things that we do without your help, and we greatly appreciate it. So the kind of jobs that we do are what I consider the classic sport fish management jobs. We're out looking at the fish populations to optimize, have the best fishing regulations that we can have to give everybody a little bit of what they want and share the resource. So sometimes we need to stock fish to do that. We'll also do habitat projects to enhance some of our older lakes. And we do a lot of work looking for access for anglers, just like ASA's interest is. So those are the things we'd like to be doing. And if we could be doing those things all the time, we'd have a lot more fisheries opportunity to share with the public. But today, invasive species are increasingly an issue for all of our staff. It's not just the aquatic nuisance species coordinator that's stuck figuring out how to deal with invasive species. It's everybody. For example, our stream managers are dealing with, on our trout waters, are dealing with diddy moe or snot rock or rock snot. The whirling disease issue affects how we manage our native brook trout. We have abundant crayfish resources in Tennessee, over 70 species, and we have invasive species that outcompete our natives. We have native species that, when moved around the state, can outcompete other native species. So our stream managers are dealing with that. Our reservoir managers are dealing with invasives in the form of alewives, which affect our walleye natural reproduction, blueback herring introductions. We have aquatic vegetation concerns with a variety of species, and one I really like to highlight is Alabama bass. This is a native species to the Alabama, to rivers in Georgia and Alabama. This species was recently identified, but it has been moved into Tennessee waters by anglers into a lake, and it has taken over the lake. We've gone from having a lot of largemouth bass to just having these spotted bass. And we are very concerned that these fish are going to get moved even further, and we're dealing with that challenge right now. Even our hatchery managers have to deal with invasive species. Their zebra mussels have to be, they have to control their movement of water so that they're not moving zebra mussels around the state. So nobody's immune from the issue. The one issue that I kind of got stuck with as chief of fisheries is our biggest issue and that is Asian carp. Oh, I forgot about the anglers. The anglers have to put up with all the complex regulations that we have to do to limit the spread of these invasive species. So they have to deal as well. So our Asian carp invasion is definitely our biggest problem. All these species were brought to the United States for aquaculture purposes, and they escaped during floods. And by 1990, we have self-supporting populations of these 4 species of fish in the Mississippi River and the major tributaries. They have demonstrated the ability to negatively impact the ecosystem by overcrowding it. Essentially, it affects fishing and it affects boating, and I'll describe that a little more. So the most common species, and the ones that we're most concerned about because of the rate they're moving throughout our rivers, are the silver and bighead carp. Some facts about them: they eat plankton, so they're at the bottom of the food chain. They have an opportunity to mess things up that way. They do not eat fish, so from a manufacturer's point of view, you're not going to be able to sell lures to have people go catching these fish. If you were you could sell some more bows, arrows for bow fishing, but the trade-off is not worth it, believe me. They reach abundant population levels. Unlike your top predators, they're your typical sport fish. These are more like, they're lower on the food chain. There's more of them. They're more like a shad in abundance of population. And the worst part about it is the silver carp jump, and that creates a lot of issues for boating. Can you consider the risk of injury if you get hit by a 15-pound carp going at any speed? The way these fish are moving through our systems is through locks. There's no doubt about it. They're swimming upstream through locks primarily when barges come through, and they generally go downstream through the gates of the dam itself. But this is our concern: these fish moving upstream. They're very abundant in the Mississippi River, and they're coming into the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers. The other way they could move is through as bait by anglers. This image on the left here shows a gizzard shad and a silver carp, and you can see they're really common in appearance. It wouldn't be hard to accidentally cast net up a bunch of silver carp and move them to a lake, and if they were released, they could cause problems there. So we have a job of making sure everyone knows where these fish are so they don't move them as bait. So here's the distribution of bighead and silver carp as we know it now. I mean, this blood red line to the left of the screen is the Mississippi River. As they come up into the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers, those are the pink lines. The abundance of carp in those systems is fairly high, but we don't see regular reproduction. So we're lucky in that so far the recruitment, the number of fish that come into the system or are present every year is driven by migration through those locks. And to date, we've got fish in fairly abundant forms up through the state into the state of Alabama. After that, in Alabama and up in the eastern Tennessee, we only have a few observations. So there's some kind of a there are locks along the way, and each lock is serving some role as a barrier. But we actually you'll learn we'll need to have more barriers in them to keep the fish from going upstream anymore. So what are the impacts on recreational fishing and boating? We have seen declined fishing success. There's really good examples of that on oxbow lakes where people used to go crappie fishing, and now the only thing there are carp. So clearly that's an obvious decline in fishing success. On our larger reservoirs, like Kentucky Lake, that's actually a little more difficult to nail down. We are having some off years on bass on Kentucky Lake right now, but we're not seeing anything worse than we've seen in our recent 20-year averages. But the bigger problem, I think, is that the people hear that the fish are there and they don't want to go fishing there. There are other options in Tennessee and throughout the region. So people are naturally deciding to go other places. They don't have to even think about Asian carp. So the interest in fishing in these water bodies has definitely declined. And we're seeing that in our creel surveys where we're having fewer people fish these waters, even though populations may not be a lot worse than we've seen in the past. Another way that our recreational sportsmen are getting impacted is in bait restrictions. You know, a lot of people have a lot of money tied into their boats and all their fishing gear around using live bait to catch particularly striped bass in Tennessee and then hybrid striped bass. But you know, guys will have whole bait tanks in their boats. They'll have them in their garages, ways to haul fit. They want to hold fish and move them to other water bodies all the time. And their livelihood, in a lot of cases, if they're talking about guides, revolves around this. We've had to put restrictions on water bodies where we think there's a risk of them catching small Asian carp and accidentally moving them. And we've only had to do that in the western part of our state to this point, but there's a chance that we would have to do that in the eastern part of the state where we have even more of these fisheries. So we're concerned about that those fishermen are really noticing the impacts at that level. And we've got, like I mentioned, the loss of boating opportunity due to risk of injury. Some people won't take their boats out. Others, especially if they know if they're going to be on one of those oxbow lakes or a high carp area. And there could end up being restriction to navigation at some locks if we end up putting barriers in to restrict movement of carp. That we may have to minimize the number of usages of those locks to make it more practical, or we may have to keep boats away from certain parts of the navigation structures, which could limit fishing opportunity. To get into how are these carp affecting our bass populations, which would be a good example for Tennessee. If you look at a real simple food pyramid here, you got plankton on the bottom that's driven by sunlight. We've got all kinds of gizzard and threadfin shad, and then we have bass eating those. Well, when you bring in silver carp into the mix, those super abundant populations of bighead and silver carp are eating the plankton and are really crowding out opportunity for bass and shad. We still have those species, but can't help but think at some point there's not going to be enough food to go around, and that is one of the mechanisms that we're concerned about. And this kind of gets at the reality that fishermen are seeing. This side scan sonar here shows somebody trying to fish an area, and all those hits on the right and left there are Asian carp. And when you get in an area of school like this, you can imagine it'd be really hard to fish your crappie jig to find exactly your structure, or all those fish, have they been pushed out by this swarm of carp to come through? That's the complaint, or the perception that people have. So people don't want to fish over this kind of thing, understandably. So what are our impacts on our state in dealing with this problem? We've had to redirect some of our staff. We've had an increased demand for monitoring. We have to go out and develop new and more expensive techniques to deal with Asian carp. We have an increased demand for public outreach. There's the information we need to share changes all the time. It's a constantly changing target. And there's a lot more multi-agency coordination. Our out-of-state travel budget has gone way higher because of this. Our time and coordination has gone up because of this. So, and any control measure that we try to do is going to be very costly. And that, of course, raises the question, if we're doing all this stuff, what are our opportunity costs? So there is also potential loss of license revenue if people stop fishing because of it, when that would further limit our ability to fix the problem. So I just do want to end on a positive note. We have had some progress on carp control. We have regulations in place to prevent accidental movement, and we have gotten funding for our commercial fishermen to remove carp, and we're developing new removal techniques. We're cooperating with Tennessee Valley Authority, who right now we're developing a programmatic EA to identify where we should and could put barriers at locks to prevent fish from coming up the Tennessee River. And we're increasing our monitoring to track the abundance and movements of carp and what our native fish are doing at this time. And most importantly, lately, we've successfully lobbied to increase national AIS funding and Asian carp control funding. So this will allow excise taxes to have an even greater impact on sport fish projects, because we'll have this other dedicated fund to use to address AIS issues instead of the excise tax monies. And if you ever get a chance to support the legislative actions that are going on to put money towards AIS or specifically Asian carp, please support it. We really need the help. With that, I guess that's all the time I really have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
That was excellent. Thank you so much for that perspective, Frank. And just to sort of echo his last sentiment in terms of advocacy, those are pieces of legislation that we will be putting out certain action alerts through Keep America Fishing. So if you are not a member of Keep America Fishing, please head to the site and look out for those action alerts, because there are ways that individuals, much like yourself, can become involved and advocate. And quickly, we will now be switching perspectives and looking at things from the federal side and having a presentation from Craig Martin. So thank you again, Frank. Greatly appreciate your participation.
Sure thing.
This is Craig Martin, and I'd like to really thank you for the opportunity to speak to ICAST. I work for the branch of Aquatic Invasive Species within the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services Fish and Aquatic Conservation Program. So what I'm hoping to do today with my talk is really to define the problem for ICAST and talk about the federal role in AIS management, going from an all of government perspective down to the agency specific work. I want to talk about how we work with the states and other partners and stakeholders, including the ICAST members. And then finally, how ICAST benefits from AIS management and what you can do. So there was a recent study that ranked invasive species in the top 5 among global environmental impacts. And this was included among climate change and pollution. And you can imagine, for an agency whose mission is to work with partners to conserve, protect, and enhance fish, wildlife, and plants in their habitat for the benefit of the American public, that invasives are a significant problem. But why should ICAST care about invasive species? So just some pictures to illustrate it. Aquatic invasive plants can clog waterways, reduce the amount of habitat for fisheries. And then, as we heard from Frank, you have Asian carp that can actually be problems, boating hazards, but they also, in some cases in the Illinois River, can be 60% of the fish biomass. So there's no room for other species. We have other cases like zebra and quagga mussels that can foul equipment, such as engine overheating. And then, as we also heard, when management actions are put in place, it can degrade the boating experience with time lost, expenses incurred, and even excess closures. Sea lamprey infestations are another example that have significantly degraded the area or fisheries, both in quality and quantity. Oops. Is there a thing on the right here? I hope not.
Hey, Craig, I think you have to use your mouse to make it switch slides.
There it goes.
Yeah, it's kind of awkward.
Thank you. So invasive species are increasingly a 21st century problem. What we're seeing, people, goods, and services are moving across the world, and with them are invasive species. Once in the US, oftentimes they are spread through a variety of pathways and vectors, including watercraft, which has been a major source of spread. And what we're finding is that resource-dependent industries such as ICAST and all levels of government and citizens need to work together to deal with this issue. So Congress, recognizing that there was a need for an all-of-government response, passed in 1990 the Aquatic Nuisance Prevention and Control Act, and it was to facilitate an effective government response. One of the key provisions of the law was the creation of the National Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force. It's an intergovernmental organization dedicated to developing and implementing a program for waters of the United States to manage aquatic invasive species. We serve as the co-chair of the task force along with NOAA Fisheries, and there are 13 federal members, including 13 ex officio members. They work in conjunction with regional panels and issue-specific committees to coordinate efforts among agencies as well as efforts of the private sector and other North American interests. So just looking at some of the activities that include a number of forums where sport fishing interests can engage in, the task force supports 6 regional panels. They engage in a broad spectrum of stakeholders, provide balanced advice to the Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force, and identify regional priorities and issues of regional significance. Sportsmen's interests can participate in these forums to provide a balanced advice to the task force. We also support the implementation of 43 state and interstate aquatic nuisance species management plans. These really serve as the key framework for states across the United States. And sport fishing interests can be a key partner with states in developing these plans and ensure their interests are considered. We also develop species management control plans. And perhaps one of the best examples is the National Management and Control Plan for Asian carp. And there were over 60 individuals who participated in its development, including a wide range of private interests and industry interests in developing that plan so that everyone could get behind this work to manage the impacts from these species. And then finally, the task force also produces a report to Congress. And this is something that the sport fishing interest can weigh in on, the accomplishments, as well as its recommendations. So the Department of Interior, and this is stepping down from the all of government down into the department, is a major landowner. 1/5 of all the country's land area is managed by DOI. We have significant amount of miles of coastline, 476 dams, and 348 reservoirs. For the first time, we are underway in developing an invasive species strategic plan. And the draft mission of this is really working with partners and others to cost effectively protect the nation's economy, environment, and other interests from the harmful impacts of invasive species for the benefit of current and future generations. I want to emphasize this is partnering with others. So ICAST has a strong ability to engage in that forum. Now dropping that down from the department into the Fish and Wildlife Service, and I work for the Fish and Aquatic Conservation Program, and along with our national fish hatcheries and other fisheries related work, one of our major goals is managing aquatic invasive species. We have 4 different goals that are largely tied to the spread and management response to invasives. That objective 1 is really one of the key gold standards in preventing the introduction of invasive species into the United States. Other objectives include early detection, rapid response, once they're spread more widely, containment so they don't spread, secondary spread, and then oftentimes having to manage those populations through population suppression. ICAST can participate in many of these objectives and are welcome participants. I'll also be following this outline for the rest of the presentation. So again, here objective 1 is preventing the introduction of invasive species. And what we see is we operate one of the major regulatory frameworks for the federal government, which is the injurious wildlife provisions of the Lacey Act. And that allows us to prohibit the importation and transport between enumerated jurisdictions of species listed. And there are a total of 309 species that are currently listed. 19 of those were actually listed after they had become established in the United States. And what we find is that many of those are the ones that actually get all the press, and those are the ones that you hear about. Whereas the 290 that were not established, you really don't hear much about them, and that's a good thing. And over 99% of them, in fact, only one we think may be established after they were listed, showing that it is an effective way to stop invasions. And just 2 examples here on the bottom. We have the Wells catfish that can grow to be 500 to 600 pounds, and the stone Morocco, which is one of Europe's most invasive fish species. Both of these, if invaded in the United States, would have significant impacts. Other work on this front. Well, I'm sorry. Other work is what we have. We're working with the pet industry on a variety of different approaches to prevent pets and other animals that people have to be released into the environment. It's called Habitatitude. It's a wordplay. And what it's looking to do is really promoting people to buy responsibly. So don't buy a pet that you can't take care of or that may be regionally invasive, and then really protect the environment by not releasing those fish. There are many direct opportunities that ICAST members can play in prevention. That would include, with bait fish, not releasing that into the environment. This is more of an indirect way, but it's an important consideration that all of the United States need to consider in taking care of this problem. Again, so here we have our objective 3, which is preventing the spread of invasive species. We're looking to do this in 2 different ways, by reducing the risk and also educating the public on the problems that occur. One way that we're doing that is with the boating industry. And we work with the American Boat and Yacht Council, National Marine Manufacturing Association, and many others to look at boat design and construction in consideration of aquatic invasive species. This was really a way to try to reduce the risk of spreading invasives within watercraft, but the ultimate goal is really to keep boaters boating and anglers angling. Also working with recreationalists, there's a couple of turnkey national prevention campaigns. Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers is one, and Pat will be talking about the Clean Drain Dry initiative, and we recently entered into an MOU with them to help promote this work. But this is a key factor to let people be aware of the problem and what they can do to not spread, and that's Clean Drain Dry. Very important. One place where I think ASA can be, or I'm sorry, that ICAST can be very helpful is with local community engagement. I talked about earlier about increasing awareness, but we also need to increase the action, that clean, drain, dry action. And one way of doing that is by providing the tools at public ramps and access sites so that people can do that easily. And the industry has come up with some innovative solutions. Here's one example. It's a clean, drain, dry, dispose unit that can be parked at access sites. And we believe this will really promote and increase that behavior for people to increase the action. How ICAST members can help mitigate the risk of spreading aquatic invasive species. What we see, number one, is foul state laws when they're put in place to clean, drain, dry. A number of states, that's the law. Comply with watercraft inspection decontamination programs. In the West in particular, we see where that has a very strong amount of work, but also some in the East as well, like on Lake George. And in many areas, there are lake stewards in place to help inspect and make sure boats are clean, drained, and dried. Please follow any temporary closures that may occur. Those are often put in place because there's a problem that needs to be managed. And then also partaking in national, regional, and local messaging is a very important aspect where ICAST can participate. Finally, as I had mentioned before, sea lamprey is a world-class example where species are being managed to suppress their population so that there are more desirable fish that are available for recreational or commercial fishing. And as I said, integrated pest management of sea lamprey control is an example that's occurring in the Great Lakes and Lake Champlain. And just as one example, in the 1800s, both lake trout and landlocked Atlantic salmon were extirpated. They started to be reintroduced in the 1970s. And without the benefit of sea lamprey control, their populations would never have taken off. And in fact, over the last 5 years is the first time that landlocked Atlantic salmon have begun to spawn again within Lake Champlain, and significant populations for harvest and sport fishing. So just in conclusion, invasive species are a significant threat to ICAST member sport fishing interests. The federal government is a significant landholder and steward of public lands and manages invasive species on its land and water and jurisdiction in partnership with others. The federal government is working through a variety of forums at state, industry, NGO, and public to protect the nation's fishery resources, economy, and environment. And specifically, ICAST members and sport fishing interests can get involved in national, regional, and state planning processes. They can get involved in these national campaigns, which again, Pat will be talking about here shortly. Make sure to please clean, drain, dry your boats and any equipment before moving between water bodies. Participate in watercraft inspection decontamination if it's in place. Respect state regulatory actions when they occur. Make environmentally responsible pet choices and never release pets to the environment. And then support proactive prevention action, such as those that are occurring through injurious wildlife listings. And with that, that's the end of my presentation.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective, Craig. And I just wanted to touch on one thing and really just highlight the importance of you including how individuals can sort of take action themselves. I know Pat will talk more about that as well, but I think that it's really neat to see there's so many things going on at the federal level that are large scale and sort of overlapping, but that in the end of the day, a lot of this really boils down to actions individuals themselves can take. And additionally, I'm really pleased that you mentioned the strategic plan that you're developing, and that's something that us at the American Sport Fishing Association are extremely happy about and supportive of. And that was born out of the S47 package that came through last Congress, and that's just one of the many awesome things that was sort of included in there. So we really appreciate your perspective and taking your time to sort of educate us on all the great things y'all are doing at the federal level. So thank you again for that.
Thank you.
And Pat, we're really excited to hear from you now, and we're going to let you go ahead and take it away.
Hey, thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you, Chad, for that introduction. And I'm really happy to be here today to talk with you about a real problem that we have in the conservation arena as it relates to fishing and our protection of our fisheries. Invasive species, as we heard, are a real threat from the previous speakers. They pose a lot of different challenges to the resource and to recreational users that use the resource. And I know they're not as interesting as the latest fishing gear or new depth finder that's coming out, but I want to shed a little bit of light on what the challenges are, but more importantly, what ASA members can do and how they can get involved to be proactive and actually do something about invasive species. So I'm going to talk with you about our Clean, Drain, Dry initiative, and that's a public service and awareness campaign that we've launched in partnership with a number of stakeholders around the country, including state, federal, and local partners, to coordinate communications and outreach to deliver the message on the ground to anglers, boaters, and all recreational users on how best to prevent invasive species. And that's through 3 simple steps: clean, drain, and dry. And it really is that easy when it comes to doing the best action and the best practices for preventing the spread of invasive species. And this program has been around since 2006. And like I said, we work with a whole host of partners to deliver the message at a local level, at a state level, and as Craig mentioned, working with the federal government to implement on a federal and national level to support state and federal agencies on invasive species prevention through tools and resources and some of the technology and techniques I'm going to show you in a little bit. So a little bit about Wildlife Forever. We're a 32-year-old organization. We were founded with a mission to conserve America's outdoor heritage through conservation education, preservation of habitat, and the scientific management of fish and wildlife. Again, core principles I think most people can believe in. And as I said, in that 32-year history, we've accomplished a great deal. One of the things that we're proud of is being able to innovate conservation and innovate programs that meet the needs of the American public. One of those core programs that we developed back in 2000 was the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Alliance, which most of you know as TRCP today. Again, a wonderful group. We helped to found that organization, and today they're thriving and doing wonderful work all across the country. Another core and critical program that we helped to lead was the Master Walleye Circuit. Many of you know that program, that fishing tournament circuit hosted by Cabela's and Bass Pro Shops remains viable and strong today. And another key program that we developed was Racing for Wildlife, which is a NASCAR brand to bring awareness about conservation and connect the sport of NASCAR to fish, hunting, and the American outdoors. And in our 32-year legacy, we've created and performed over 2,000 conservation restoration projects all across North America. Many of those projects related to fish and fish habitat were in partnership with the Fish America Foundation, where we did stocking of salmon and trout. We've done a number of habitat enhancement projects. We've built artificial reefs off the coast of Florida. And we continue to thrive in providing best-in-class education and outreach throughout the nation through a variety of programs, which I'm going to share with you in a little bit. But another core thing that we and our partners are proud of is the acquisition of habitat and critical spawning areas for fish and habitat for reintroduction of species of greatest concern. One of those fun projects was up in Wisconsin, where we helped to reintroduce the elk to the Chequamegon National Forest, which today is a thriving population. And last year they had their first huntable season. And again, another core principle of our mission and our foundation is research and funding research to support the scientific management of fish and game, to have a balanced approach towards conservation. Today at Wildlife Forever, we really have 3 key core programs, legacy programs, that we use to fulfill our mission and to fulfill the mission of our members and the American public. One of those key programs is the State Fish Art Contest, and it's our way of connecting youth to fish, fishing, and the great outdoors. And it's a K through 12 art program where students draw their state fish or any state fish and win all sorts of prizes and opportunity to celebrate the arts, but really to learn about conservation, to learn about aquatic ed through the arts. In this past year, our season just wrapped up for the 2020 contest. We had over 5,000 entries from 37 international countries. It's a wonderful program. I encourage everyone to get involved and to help spread that message of conservation to youth through this international art contest. There's a whole array of free resources available on our statefishart.org website. And one of the neat opportunities for ASA members to get involved is to contact your state agency or NGO partner and participate by hosting the State Fish Art program in your state. We currently have 6 different state hosts: Alaska, Florida, Georgia, Missouri, Nebraska, and Texas all host their program within the state agency. And we really see participation in the program increase when those states host their program. Another wonderful program that we're working to implement, and it's an extension of our habitat division that we've founded our core principles on, is Prairie City USA. And this is our program to help solve some of the issues we have with pollinators, the rusty patch bumblebee, butterflies, and it's really to work with municipalities and cities to develop underutilized green space and put those back into prairie and conservation habitats for fish and wildlife. And when we restore some of these underutilized green spaces, the benefits not only to the city in reducing costs for maintenance, but it also helps water quality and helps a whole host of other conservation issues. And it's a wonderful program and tool for the community to get involved with. And most importantly, I want to share with you some information about our Clean, Drain, Dry initiative. And this is a national, like I said, national invasive species prevention campaign where we utilize marketing, outreach, and education to focus on implementing tools, techniques, technology, all to increase awareness and all to support the best practices of clean, drain, and dry, and really focusing on those key prevention behaviors of clean, drain, and dry. It's a message that's shared with states, it's a message that's shared with federal agencies, and it's something ASA members can get involved with real easily, utilizing some of the tools I'm going to share with you that we've developed over the course of our program. One of the challenges that we have with invasive species is a lot of people think invasive species are everywhere. It's inevitable that they're going to show up in a lake. Why worry and why work to stop the spread? Well, I can tell you, AIS are not inevitable. We can slow the spread because doing so, slowing the spread buys time for resource managers and the resource to adapt to the challenges that are posed by invasive species. And as Craig from the Fish and Wildlife Service mentioned, and even Frank, there's a lot of other species on the way that pose significant risk to being transported by recreational users and causing additional harm to our watersheds and our fisheries. And as Frank and Craig also mentioned, what's the risk? The risks, and we're seeing more and more of these each day, are closed access, privatization of accesses, mandatory check stations, diminished fisheries, all relate to barriers to fishing and boating. And those are things that so many of us are working hard to try to break down those barriers. But fortunately, there's some things we can do. So at the Clean, Drain, Dry initiative, as I said, we work with a whole host and a coalition of partners to really implement and deliver that message of clean, drain, dry and invasive species awareness and prevention on the ground. And how do we do that? Well, we do it through professional media and marketing, as many of you do when you promote your products, your campaigns, or your latest piece of equipment through marketing and through advertising. We use similar techniques to take invasive species to that level and that level of awareness. And we do so through consistency of message and working with our state and federal partners who help guide the practice and help guide the policy and the message that supports the science that we ultimately want to engage the public with. And so using that targeted approach with marketing, targeting key audiences, we work not only focusing the message on anglers, but all recreational users. And so it's homeowners, it's watercraft owners, it's people that kayak, and a whole host of stakeholders that participate with water recreation, giving them the message and the tools to help implement those key clean, drain, dry best practices. And in doing so, we engage with the public. We work with our partners to leverage funding and pool resources so we can deliver this message on the ground and maximize the opportunity to really make an impression and really make a difference. And in our history of working on invasive species, one of the key things is we've delivered over 2 billion impressions. And so that's by using media, billboards, television, all things I'm going to share with you in a bit. But one of the key things is by working together, we increase efficiency, we increase productivity, and we save money, all things that are very important to any business owner and to any state and federal agency. So what can ASA members do? Well, they can utilize the resources that we have available. We've got a whole array of branded materials and products for their customers, for retail centers, and for manufacturers to utilize in supporting the message through their outlets. We've got brochures, we've got a full product catalog that support a whole array of tools, techniques, different mediums, and products that really support that message that's shared by all our state and federal partners and stakeholders from around the country. We've got a whole host of different television public service announcements, 30-second, minute and a half. We even have full feature 30-minute programs on our Silent Invader DVD series. Again, these are resources that are available for you to help integrate the message into your audience through your outlets, and can, again, include a whole array of different resources. We also have radio PSAs. We've developed a whole host of a variety of website content, social media, print ads, indoor and outdoor content. And we customize this often with our partners who help fund the work. And so we work with those local partners to sometimes tailor the message. In Ohio, and when we talk with folks who have Asian carp issues, we really try to promote that outreach message of trash unused bait, because as Frank said, those minnows, those Asian carp look just like baby shad. And so one of the things we want to do is we want to promote not spreading invasive species through bait fish. And so trash unused bait is a nice way to help reiterate that conservation message. Another thing that ASA members can do is they can check out different signage and exhibits and displays that we have available. We've designed a whole host of things that include boat ramp signage, indoor and outdoor signage, and we've created customized displays and kiosks to help deliver that message of AIS prevention through good media, through good graphics, and again, tools that are really available for you to take advantage of and work with your team to develop and implement these programs. The benefits also, we also work with lake associations, municipalities, state and federal agencies. We work really closely with a number of counties and lake associations to build their capacity to use the message and to deliver it to the public. Again, not all state and federal agencies have capacity to do some of this work. We have the tools and resources here available, and you're one of the solutions to the message and to the problem in delivering this message to your customers and to your team. One of the ways that you can see some examples here of how we integrate this message to the public, we work with community when we have community events. Here in Minnesota, our governor celebrates fishing opener. So we proclaim Clean Drain Dry Day on Minnesota Fishing Opener. We have for over 10 years. These are things that we can help you work with your state to get your legislative bodies interested and willing to participate with raising awareness of invasive species. We also work with local guides and fishing guides and local radio personalities on the message, and they even display it on their boat wraps, custom wraps on their vehicle, and they use that to help deliver the message through community events, state fairs, and a whole host of other opportunities to engage the public. And when we do that, when we engage the public with tools, techniques, products, and place them at strategic places and time for them to take advantage of it, we really see an increase in behavior change. We know people get the message because they get it multiple times throughout the day or throughout their year. So what are the results? Well, we know when we make investments in prevention that it works. We have increased compliance with laws when we have a low rate of spread. And we've seen that time and time again, is when we make the necessary investment to reach our audience with a strategic message and use multiple tools to deliver that message through partners and through investing in media and investing in outreach, we can actually see a lower rate of spread, excuse me. And we know that we're driving behavior change by delivering the message in that key, simple, clean, drain, dry message. And in 2019, we've delivered over 102 million impressions to our partnership. So again, a whole host of resources are available at cleandraindry.org. And before I close, I want to just leave one parting question. Are we getting enough ROI, return on investment, from the excise tax dollars that the industry supports needed to address this conservation issue? And what can we do as an industry to support greater outreach and education and support more implementation of best practices to deliver the message on the ground and to increase that awareness of invasive species? So we're here to help you. We're your partner in conservation. We're your partner with Clean Drain Dry. And now we've got a whole host of tools and resources available for you. So please check us out at cleandraindry.org, and let's work together in stopping the spread of invasive species. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Pat. And I do encourage all who are viewing to head to the cleandraindry.org website, take a look at some of the materials, and I'm sure you will see quite a few of them are, are things you've seen before. I know as an angler myself, I see these signs and messages everywhere, and they do make an impact on me. But that's going to conclude our conservation session today. And I just want to thank, Pat, Frank, and Craig for joining us today and giving these excellent presentations. Hopefully, with these three speakers, you could see, the various ways aquatic invasive species are dealt with, looked at, and handled at the state, federal level, and then additionally how NGOs are a key in that puzzle as well. So thank you again so much for joining us all today. And again, for all the work that you're doing and supporting the sport fishing industry. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and I look forward to working with you more so in the future. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Chad. Take care.